This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Greater Toronto Sewer and Water Main Contractors Association. Clean water, our goal, our future.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Construction Record Podcast. I'm digital media editor Warren Frey, and with me I have
Ben Brunnen, Vice President of Fiscal Policy with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers.
Great. And today we're talking about a new report they've put out called Canada's Natural Gas and Oil Emissions, Ongoing Reductions, Demonstrable Improvement. And it covers a lot of stuff about the industry, as in how they're trying to reduce emissions, what technology is being used to that extent, how we compare to other countries. So I thought we'd just start with some of the technologies covered in the report, that a few which I wasn't even aware of.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Warren, for the introduction there. So, this report is the first in our ESG series, Environment, Social Governance series, and emissions intensity is clearly the most significant priority when we look at ESG. And what the report does is it showcases the performance of industry, whether it's oil, natural gas, or in situ or oil sands mining, and identifies some of the technologies that have been deployed to help reduce GHGs. So when we get into the technologies, I think what the report shows is some very, very good results. In the conventional space, we've reduced our emissions intensity by 32% over the last 8 years. And and that's on natural gas and liquids, and largely a lot of that comes from focusing on technologies that would reduce our methane leaks and such, but also with respect to efficiencies at our plants. So how can we combine heat and energy in a way that sort of makes our plants more efficient through fuel gas efficiency improvements, et cetera. On the oil sands front, the technologies that have come to bear, have been relatively significant as well. And so, for in situ, we've seen an 8% reduction over the last 6 years, and for mining, we've seen a 14% reduction over the last 6 years. For in situ, some of the technologies that have come to bear, are steam displacement type of technologies. How can you, find a way to utilize less steam, which, depends upon natural gas for generation, which creates the GHGs. So, combining heat and energy is obviously sort of one of the top issues there, and that's cogeneration. Or else finding ways to just maximize your loops through taking advantage of your heat energy. Specifically for oil sands, one of the key technologies is called paraffinic froth treatment, which is a process that effectively removes some of the asphaltenes and sort of heavy products in the water out of the bitumen after it's mined, and that it creates a pipeline spec product that can then be shipped without any further upgrading. And so that technology has actually been quite substantial at improving our emissions performance. So those sort of summarize some of the technologies that have come to bear that have resulted in the emissions reductions we've seen thus far.
And one thing I noticed is carbon capture utilization and storage. A few years ago, maybe more than a few by this point, it was kind of looked upon, not by the industry, but it was, you talk about it and people would say, oh, that's never going to happen. And it apparently is happening. So maybe you could break down how carbon capture is being used.
Yeah, well, carbon capture, is currently in operation. There's carbon capture facilities. There's one in Alberta through the Shell Quest project that's linked into their upgrader. But also we have 2 in Saskatchewan that are in play. And so when we look at that, it's not an insignificant sort of cost from a technology perspective, but it has the potential to, really make a step change in terms of the emissions, and notably total emissions. So, Shell Quest is one of those projects that we actually look to when we're thinking about what the future looks like for CCUS. And so how has that been deployed? What kind of cost reductions or efficiencies have been and can be achieved if we're to deploy that down the road in the future, which is a key focus of where the federal government wants to advance, emissions reduction going forward.
And just for our audience, I mean, I'm sure some of them already know this, but I don't. So I want to know, how does it work? Like you're putting it back into the ground, or is that a gross oversimplification?
No, that's pretty straightforward. So there needs to be investment in capital technologies that capture the carbon off of a stream. So for Quest, there's kind of two ways to do it. The one is a post combustion carbon capture, where you will capture the carbon off a flue gas stream, which is basically your exhaust. But the second is you can actually capture carbon off of an internal process. And in the case of Shell Quest, it's the latter. And what that does is you can take the CO2 out of a reaction within the facility and then sequester it. That generally gives you a higher concentration of CO2, and the higher the concentration, the more efficient it is, which is on balance a good thing. It's relatively the most expensive part of carbon capture, utilization, and storage tends to be the capture infrastructure that needs to be attached to the facility. But then once you capture it, there's a little bit of sort of dehydration or processing that needs to go into it, and then it's shipped via pipeline. And then into a reservoir that sort of has the rate integrity specifications. We would look to those. There's multiple ways to do it, but a deep saline reservoir is where you would inject the carbon dioxide into the cavern, and it would form itself in a way that it's stored there permanently. There's another way, there are multiple sort of paths, if you will, but another way to sort of manage the CO2 is to inject it in what's called an EOR, Enhanced Oil Recovery Reservoir, where the CO2 acts as a flood that would generate additional incremental oil production through mature basin. And again, through the way that the carbon dioxide manifests itself, it would be permanently sequestered, while at the same time enhanced oil recovery is generated as a result of the injection.
Mm-hmm. Now, people tend to think of emissions as just sort of isolated to oil and gas, but in your report, you talk about upstream electricity, so getting sources for what you're doing that are also addressing emissions. So maybe you could kind of go into that.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you're going after, if you're talking about CCUS with respect to upstream electricity, that's, that carbon capture and storage applies to multiple industries. Mm-hmm. So for electrification, if our generation source is coal or if it's natural gas, then carbon capture and storage can be applied there just as it could be applied to oil and gas. Companies are also looking at electrification as a means for companies to operate their upstream assets. So if there's access to electrification infrastructure tie-ins, et cetera, and we look to northern BC, for example, here, where some companies have electrified their upstream facilities as a result of sort of access to hydro-generated electrification. And what that does is, instead of having a gas-fired plant, you move to a sort of electrical-fired plant. That's an emission savings, provided that the upstream emissions that are generating that electricity are low emission. So that's certainly a technology that's in play. For companies right now, they're testing sort of net zero or zero emission well site technologies. So whether it comes from electricity, or whether it's just a matter of finding a way to maximize your efficiency with the with your production source, that's still in development, but that's kind of where the research is going. And then perhaps one last point on the conventional side relates to the issue of the use of diesel. So finding ways to displace diesel for electrification, or whatever the case may be, that's an ongoing piece that's currently being looked at.
Okay, and in the report, you don't just talk about stuff that's currently being used, you talk about potential technologies. So if you can maybe go into a few details on what these potential technologies are and what kind of the window is before they become a thing that starts getting used.
Right. So what we do have is what we call the lab bench, if you will, or pieces that are near-term potential technologies. And so within there's solvent-assisted extraction processes, which is basically a way to displace steam in the extraction of bitumen from SAGD facilities. And if you can inject solvents in there and reduce the need for steam and still have excellent sort of bitumen recovery, all of a sudden there you've reduced your emissions. There's a piece that actually can be combined with that was sort of currently being explored called electromagnetic heating processes, where it operates similar to a microwave, where the electromagnetic waves are put into the reservoir and it heats up the bitumen. That in combination with solvent is proving to be another extraction method that's showing some substantial promise and is moving to sort of further piloting. These technologies that I've just described actually have the potential to get to zero emission if all goes well. So it's promising results, and we'll see where it gets to.
Okay, and you also in the report address how Canada stands compared to other countries and other oil producers around the world. So maybe you could go into that a little bit in terms of emissions.
Absolutely. So what's very important for us is to articulate how we compare relative to other jurisdictions, and this report does some of that as well. I mean, certainly we compare to ourselves, which is key to being leaders in environmental performance. But then the question becomes, how are we comparing to other jurisdictions? And I'd say what we can demonstrate is, from an oil sands perspective, we actually have blends of oil sands that have emissions intensity that can actually beat the North American average, or even or even the global average for that matter. And so not a lot of people know that. And so the fact that we have blends of oil sands that are actually lower in emissions intensity than the average for the globe, I think is a very significant testament to the work that our industry has done to improve our efficiency and our emissions intensity. The other thing and so there are a number of different crude blends that come from Alberta that have seen substantial reductions in their intensity. And while we're driving towards continuous improvement, we've made significant strides to position our crudes in a way that are quite comparable globally, many of them. But then we look at it more broadly and indicate, and say, to what extent are other jurisdictions, innovating and investing the way that they are, and collecting and reporting the data so that they can bring those comparisons forward? And the answer is, no other jurisdiction undertakes the level of effort from a disclosure perspective and from an investment and performance perspective that Canada does. So when we look to comparables internationally, we actually are challenged because the data simply don't give us an apples-to-apples comparison in just about anywhere. In some instances, there might be measurements of intensity of crude blends that exclude the methane factor, and that's a big factor. And so if we're not including those types of, full upstream emissions, we're not being compared favorably with the data that's out there. But what Canada is doing is we're saying, here's the evidence with, very replicable, publicly available data and methodology, and here's the result, right? We have not seen another jurisdiction where the industry presents the industry performance data in a way that demonstrates the performance, demonstrates the transparency and the accountability, and makes the commitment to the continuous improvement that we do. And so that's why, what Canada oil and gas companies are doing are head and shoulders above any other major producing jurisdiction.
And just in terms for historical sort of perspective, when was the moment of clarity for the industry? Because there was definitely a time when, maybe you weren't downplaying around the scenes, but public perception was that the industry didn't care, and that clearly has shifted in maybe the last year or two, maybe earlier, you'd have a better perspective on this than I would because you see it from the inside. But it definitely seems that publicly you can see that people are actually working on this now. The oil and gas industry is saying we need to make sure, carbon emissions are a problem. We need to deal with it. When did that kind of behind the scenes? When did that start? That you looked at it and said we need to fix this?
Well, industry recognized its need for strong environmental performance, for some time now. Notably, we created, COSIA, the Canadian Oil Sands Innovation Alliance, probably a decade ago. And that group was basically a consortium of oil sands companies that were looking to pool resources to develop technology to minimize environmental footprint, air, land, water, tailings ponds, et cetera. And so that effort has been underway for some time. But it's certainly gotten more acute in the last couple of years. And so, what's helpful is that we're starting to see the results of the significant investments that the companies have been making in R&D for the past decade. And so what we share in this report, from an oil sands perspective, is simply performance over, say, the last 6 years. Over the last 6 years, we've reduced emissions intensities from 8 to 14%, depending on the extraction method. But now let's look ahead. Let's look at these technologies that are at play, the potential for zero emission technologies, right? And to be piloting those and moving those forward. All of a sudden, 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, what does the emissions profile look like? And it could be substantially reduced. And that's a similar story for the conventional side, for the natural gas and liquids producers. A 32% reduction over the last 8 years, that is, that's very good performance. That's exceptional performance. And these companies are continually innovating and focusing to find ways to ensure that we can get the carbon out of the barrel so that Canada can, confidently position itself as the barrel of choice to meet, growing oil and gas demand, because we do know that oil and gas demand is going to grow over the next, 10, 20 years or so. And, we should be the barrel of choice. And today the other day we released a report that says, here's why, here's what justifies it. Here's the evidence, here's the commitment, here's the investment, and here's where we're going to take it in the future.
Okay, and I guess my final question would be, you're doing all this stuff with what you're producing and how you're producing it, but the end result, the fuel itself, when that goes out to market, is it in any way more efficient? Does it also address, when you put it inside a car, for instance, or wherever else you're going to use it, that creates less emissions at that point as well, the end point? Or is that out of anybody's control, really?
Well, what we focus on, by and large, is what we can largely control. So the emissions intensity, performance that we share in this report is what we call Scope 1 and Scope 2, which is the direct emissions generated and the indirect emissions generated as a result of our upstream activities. Scope 3 is sort of an additional piece that speaks to the downstream end use side of the emissions. And so we can control the upstream and the indirect with the upstream, but in terms of the downstream side of things, there are improvements that need to be made, but we need to set the accountabilities for those emissions reductions at the point of use. And I think that's where governments step in as well. Whether it's what does the consumer do, and what does the consumer behavior demand of emissions performance? Is it a carbon price? Is it encouraging energy efficiency? Those types of policy levers are the exact types of policy levers that are available to governments to address downstream emissions of consumers. And if you assign the accountability for the emissions to the entity with control, that's the most effective and efficient way to get us to reduce our emissions over the long term.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Ben.
No problem. Thanks, Warren.
This episode of The Construction Record is brought to you by the Ontario Sewer and Water Main Construction Association. Clean water is everybody's business.